Senator John Kennedy stood on the precipice of delivering the most clinical political takedown ever recorded in the annals of the American legislature. What follows is a detailed, unedited retelling of a congressional proceeding that permanently transformed the paradigm of accountability in the nation's capital. As the refined, highly networked Representative Adam Schiff entered the senatorial chamber, he harbored complete certainty that he would publicly disgrace a figure he dismissed as a foolish, unsophisticated rural attorney from Louisiana. Rather than achieving this, he unknowingly stumbled into a constitutional slaughter, meticulously planned by a vastly superior legal intellect equipped with an insurmountable stockpile of empirical proof. The air within the magnificent Senate hall was heavy with suspense. Cameras from every primary journalistic outlet were transmitting the event live, airing what the mainstream press had already categorized as a simple, guaranteed triumph for Schiff. Pundits across various television networks had dedicated their morning broadcasts to forecasting that the cultured Harvard-trained litigator would easily outclass the conservative from the South. The internet was ablaze with viral tags predicting Schiff's victory, and political wagerers had placed him as the overwhelming favorite. They remained blissfully ignorant of the impending catastrophe. Senator John Kennedy ambled into the luminescent chamber, appearing precisely like the caricature painted by his critics. Clad in a somewhat wrinkled garment, he toted an exceptionally battered leather satchel and articulated his words with a sluggish, intentional Southern drawl that frequently led the D.C. aristocracy to misjudge him as a naive, unlettered country official. In stark contrast, Representative Adam Schiff strode into the room resembling a cinematic icon. He flaunted a flawless wardrobe, immaculately styled hair, and the steadfast poise of a figure accustomed to annihilating political adversaries on nationwide broadcasts. He assumed this clash would be a breeze, a presumption that would ultimately trigger his downfall. Settling into his chair and tweaking his audio equipment, Schiff instantly assumed a sneeringly patronizing attitude that routinely charmed his base. Glancing across the expanse, he proposed that Mr. Kennedy ought to return to cultivating crawfish in the swamps, leaving the nuanced complexities of constitutional jurisprudence to individuals capable of grasping them. Even measured against Washington's ruthless benchmarks, the profound hubris of this comment provoked a restless murmur among the attendees. Kennedy retorted with such remarkable mildness that his voice barely exceeded a murmur, yet it resonated powerfully across the audio system. He beamed courteously, presenting a folksy concession that Schiff was likely correct in his assessment. Pondering aloud, Kennedy admitted he was merely a humble rural advocate who just so happened to attend a minor institution situated up north. He hesitated momentarily, drumming his chin as if struggling to recall, before offhandedly noting that the institution was Harvard Law School. This revelation marked the initial fracture in Schiff's carefully constructed bravado. Kennedy pressed on, maintaining his deceptively sugary demeanor, conceding that Schiff was also accurate regarding his deficit in constitutional proficiency, pointing out that his experience merely consisted of clerking for the U.S. Supreme Court, a credential, he supposed, held little weight in the broader context. A sharp, terrifying epiphany swept through the chamber as journalists, spectators, and legislative staff simultaneously grasped that the storyline had drastically veered off course. The man sitting before them was not the clumsy, amateurish bumpkin they had been led to expect. Extending a calloused hand toward his battered satchel, Kennedy remarked that his father had instilled a crucial principle during his youth. He observed that whenever an individual speaks with excessive flair, it is imperative to scrutinize their underlying work, since the most vociferous talkers consistently harbor the most significant secrets. With the deliberate, unhurried exactness of a veteran litigator, Kennedy popped open his case to expose enormous piles of governmental records, each bearing weighty, official emblems. He declared that he had indeed audited Schiff's work, and the results were profoundly alarming. The snare had been immaculately laid, and the allegedly genius legislator had marched straight into its jaws. The initial binder Kennedy produced was heavily adorned with the formidable, unmistakable crests of the House Intelligence Committee. Upon unsealing it, the enclosed files appeared to emanate the sheer gravity of national defense. Schiff's self-assured, media-ready visage noticeably faltered as the realization dawned that this would not be the gentle, partisan banter he had anticipated. Commencing his inquiry, Kennedy's vocal tone shed a measure of its rural warmth, adopting a significantly more severe and questioning nature. He brought to Schiff's attention his role on the Intelligence Committee, underscoring that safeguarding the country's most vulnerable classified data was an inviolable duty. Adjusting his posture to exude command, Schiff defensively countered that he approached this duty with profound gravity and unparalleled ethical rigor. Kennedy softly interjected, derailing the rehearsed rhetoric by noting that if such assertions were accurate, he found himself entirely baffled by the highly questionable chronology linking severely restricted briefings with sensational journalistic exposés that miraculously surfaced mere hours subsequently. Attributing this to his simple rural inquisitiveness, Kennedy directed the audience's gaze to the massive display screens, presenting the proof with lethal chronological exactitude. He drew focus to the 15th of March 2019, a date when Schiff participated in a rigorously classified meeting concerning active counter-espionage endeavors. This involved exceedingly delicate intelligence, the precise variety that could result in the assassination of field agents if disclosed to adversarial entities. The visual timeline indicated this meeting formally wrapped up at precisely 2:00 p.m. Kennedy subsequently revealed legally compelled telephonic logs demonstrating that at exactly 2:47 p.m. that identical afternoon, Schiff initiated a phone call to a CNN producer. By 6:00 p.m. that same day, CNN broadcasted a colossal, exclusive report encompassing the specific, nuanced particulars that had exclusively been deliberated within that secured, confidential environment. The chronology was catastrophic, but before Schiff could mount an objection, Kennedy calmly elevated his hand and transitioned to the subsequent record. He displayed the 3rd of April 2019, highlighting another confidential meeting explicitly addressing intelligence gatherers and their methodologies. The sequence replicated itself flawlessly upon the monitor. The briefing ended at 3:15 p.m. At 3:52 p.m., telecommunications data verified a call made to MSNBC. By 7:00 p.m., MSNBC was airing a primary segment showcasing intelligence that could solely have been leaked by an individual present inside that fortified space. Kennedy's tone began to project the solemn, irrefutable authority of a veteran magistrate. He declared his main apprehension did not stem from a solitary error in judgment. Through exhaustive probing, his investigators had chronicled 23 distinct occurrences across 2 years, wherein classified sessions attended by Schiff were immediately succeeded by prominent news articles divulging the precise topics of discussion. That figure lingered in the hushed environment like a colossal penal charge, 23 separate instances. This behavior was neither accidental nor coincidental. It was a methodical, intentional campaign. Kennedy nonchalantly pointed out that the federal punishment for disseminating state secrets spanned up to a decade of incarceration, and when such disclosures actively jeopardize ongoing missions, the offense escalates into the realm of treason. Schiff's internal terror manifested physically. His knuckles blanched as he clutched the witness desk, completely grasping the disastrous magnitude of the evidence presented against him. He tried to stumble through a justification regarding contextual nuances, but Kennedy silenced him with a lethal, frigid composure. He informed Schiff that the context was blatantly obvious. Schiff was exploiting his revered seat on the Intelligence Committee to illegally convert the nation's deepest secrets into inexpensive broadcast amusement. The representative was handling sensitive state intelligence as mere currency to buy journalistic limelight. Grabbing a different folder, adorned with the insignia of the Department of Justice, Kennedy unveiled the catastrophic human toll of this egotism. The room descended into an oppressive quietude as redacted files were shown, chronicling the disastrous aftermath. Due directly to these specific media disclosures, 3 crucial human operatives were endangered, necessitating emergency evacuations from antagonistic foreign territories. 2 essential, active anti-terrorism missions were completely compromised, and 1 U.S. intelligence operative narrowly survived a lethal ambush. Projecting an escalating moral dominance, Kennedy leaned in and spoke of the genuine American citizens whose lives were thrust into peril purely because a lawmaker was unable to withstand the self-serving urge to view his name in print and his visage on television screens. Locking eyes with his target, Kennedy articulated that the congressman had sworn a sacred vow to protect the populace, yet he had alternatively weaponized the committee into a customized public relations agency. Pacing the floorboards, Kennedy completely shed his Southern gentleman exterior, substituting it with the fiery fervor of a righteous inquisitor. He proclaimed that every telephonic communication with CNN and every whispered fact to MSNBC constituted not congressional oversight, but an act of staggering treachery. It was a betrayal of his sworn oath, his peers, and the citizens of America who relied upon him for their security. Schiff remained immobilized in his seat, entirely unable to construct a reply that would not instantly amount to either perjury or a naked confession of federal criminality. Nevertheless, Kennedy was far from concluded. He accessed his next dossier, remarking that the unauthorized disclosure of state secrets was merely a prelude to the colossal fraudulence surrounding the Russia probe. This exceptionally voluminous folder was secured with FBI emblems and blanketed in classification markers that caused the room's security detail to fidget anxiously. Unveiling its contents, Kennedy readied himself to unmask a 3-year crusade of political destabilization. He recalled to Schiff his unyielding, multi-year pledge to the citizens of America. For a span of 3 years, Schiff had boldly guaranteed the populace that he held proof, concealed in plain view, establishing that Donald Trump was conspiring with the Russian state. Gesturing toward the screens once more, Kennedy initiated an extended, unavoidable compilation of video segments. The monitors were saturated with continuous footage of Schiff's media appearances, spanning from 2017 through 2020, his own voice reverberating through the hall, endlessly asserting across every network that absolute proof of illicit conspiracy and coordination existed. The aggregate impact of viewing this compilation was astounding. It depicted not a lawmaker uttering a fleeting remark, but an individual perpetrating a meticulously synchronized, unceasing operation of falsehoods grounded on proof that genuinely never materialized. Displaying theatrical exactness, Kennedy extracted a compact calculator from his attire. Based on his team's rigorous tally, Schiff had broadcasted assertions regarding his possession of clandestine collusion evidence exactly 237 times throughout those 3 years. This equated to a mean of 1 fabrication every 4.5 days. Kennedy highlighted that Schiff had constructed his entire contemporary political identity, along with his colossal fundraising machinery, wholly upon the foundation that he harbored classified evidence of treason. Subsequently, Kennedy delivered a crushing blow by presenting a massive pile of authentic FBI files, the specific internal communications, intelligence reviews, and briefing dossiers supplied directly to Schiff throughout the probe. He exhibited a heavily censored paper dated the 23rd of January 2018, where the highlighted passage was undeniable. The FBI had unequivocally notified the committee that zero proof of coordination had been discovered. Schiff attempted to interject, but Kennedy barreled forward with the momentum of a locomotive. He recited from a February 15 update, an FBI review concluding there was no proof of a criminal plot. He referenced a March 8 communication declaring the claims lacked substance, and an April 12 file corroborating the absolute absence of collusion evidence. Kennedy cataloged 19 distinct instances wherein the Federal Bureau of Investigation definitively instructed Schiff's committee that the collusion storyline lacked any factual basis whatsoever. Yet, promptly following those very briefings, Schiff would strut before the broadcast cameras and proclaim he had witnessed indisputable verification. The clacking of Kennedy's calculator resonated piercingly as he synthesized the catastrophic arithmetic. The FBI relayed the factual reality to Schiff 19 times, whereas Schiff relayed the exact opposite to the American populace 237 times. This translated to approximately 12 broadcasted falsehoods for every singular truth he absorbed privately within a secure environment. Kennedy pointed out that down in the swamps of Louisiana, when an individual is persistently informed of a lack of evidence yet continues to holler that it exists, a highly specific term is applied to that conduct. They label it lying. Extracting another batch of records originating from special counsel Robert Mueller's team, Kennedy demonstrated that Schiff's conduct transcended simple falsehoods. He was actively distributing recognized foreign propaganda. The screens juxtaposed the notorious Steele dossier with classified briefings outlining its genuine genesis. Kennedy presented an August 2017 briefing wherein intelligence personnel unambiguously cautioned Schiff that the dossier was extremely probable to be deliberate Russian disinformation, custom-built to meddle with and deteriorate the democratic systems of America. Kennedy's tone boomed with constitutional outrage as he detailed the profound ridiculousness and peril of the predicament. Schiff was officially advised that Russian operatives had supplied fabricated intelligence to fracture the government. Rather than shielding the country from this psychological combat, Schiff appropriated that identical Russian disinformation, appeared on nationwide broadcasts, and unceasingly peddled it to the American public as absolute fact. Halting his pacing to lock his gaze on Schiff, Kennedy posed an inquiry that suspended over the chamber like the blade of an executioner. He questioned who was genuinely executing Russia's agenda, the individual Schiff continually indicted, or the representative who devoted 3 consecutive years operating as the principal amplifier for authentic Russian espionage initiatives. The paradox was so profound and catastrophic that even the Democratic participants on the panel noticeably flinched and averted their eyes. Lowering his volume to a forceful murmur, Kennedy observed that while Schiff was occupied acting for the media, authentic, valid inquiries into real perils were deprived of funding and neglected. Confidence in national agencies was obliterated, entirely so that one individual could shine as the venerated protagonist of the nightly broadcasts. Kennedy bluntly asked Schiff whether his sworn statements regarding witnessing evidence alluded to the FBI briefings that categorically stated there was none, or if he harbored some mystical proof that the Bureau had somehow overlooked. Schiff stayed utterly mute. Kennedy smirked grimly and pointed out that in his native state, uttering falsehoods under oath before a congressional body is termed perjury, an offense punishable by 5 to 20 years in a federal prison. Pushing forward with unyielding inertia, Kennedy unsealed his 4th binder, which displayed the clear logo of the Federal Election Commission. This phase of the deconstruction pivoted from political deceits to naked, verifiable financial sleaze. It served as an exhaustive monetary excavation of Schiff's tenure, laying bare the systemic bribery of an active representative by the corporate entertainment sector. Kennedy articulated his profound fascination with the lucrative incentives driving such a complex, multi-year charade. Showcasing the electoral finance logs on the monitors, Kennedy disclosed that between 2017 and 2023, Schiff absorbed an astounding $2.88 million in campaign donations stemming immediately from entertainment industry actors. However, Kennedy swiftly sidestepped the campaign ledgers to concentrate on Schiff's individual wealth accumulation. He exhibited banking logs and financial declarations verifying $1.2 million in oratorical compensation from groups tied to the entertainment sphere. He highlighted a colossal $2.1 million literary advance provided by a publishing house completely controlled by a massive Hollywood conglomerate. He enumerated $340,000 received for compensated appearances at gatherings sponsored by the industry. Punching keys on his calculator once more, Kennedy summed the private remuneration at $6.46 million, all pouring straight from the entertainment business during the precise time frame he was fiercely pushing their favored political ideologies across their media networks. Kennedy was not simply suggesting a serendipitous overlap. He was proving a straightforward reciprocal exchange of favors. He linked the fiscal data points with operative exactitude, prompting the screens to display a comparative analysis that allowed zero margin for alternate interpretation. Positioned on the left were the chronologies and sums of enormous corporate contributions. Positioned on the right were Schiff's exceptionally precise legislative votes concerning technological regulation and censorship statutes, revealing an absolute correlation. Each instance that Hollywood and colossal tech corporations requested broadened authority to silence oppositional voices or preserve their legal shielding, Schiff legislated exactly according to their desires. Kennedy subsequently unveiled explosive internal dispatches secured through legislative subpoenas, originating from within the technology conglomerates themselves. These electronic messages did not merely depict a voting history, they established active, daily synchronization between Schiff's governmental staff and the leadership suites of prominent social networking platforms. Schiff functioned not merely as an inactive proponent of censorship, his headquarters was operating as the primary command center for it. The files exposed an unyielding sequence of Schiff's personnel communicating with corporate officers to insist upon the prompt deletion, throttling, or suspension of particular conservative profiles and media. Kennedy pronounced that whenever conservative commentators endangered the narrative dominance of his affluent benefactors, Schiff weaponized the terrifying mass of the federal apparatus to guarantee those individuals were muted. This fiscal rot permeated deeply into Schiff's personal lineage. Kennedy introduced enforceable agreements demonstrating that the consulting agency owned by Schiff's spouse had mysteriously absorbed $890,000 in agreements from entertainment empires while Schiff occupied his seat on the Intelligence Committee. Moreover, the production firm belonging to his brother-in-law had acquired $1.2 million in profitable contracts with media studios that concurrently served as Schiff's primary political contributors. Kennedy presented a devastating visual diagram demonstrating how governmental authority was converted into familial riches. He charged Schiff with transforming his entire extended family into a complex money-washing enterprise intended to mask the acquisition of Hollywood leverage. Kennedy observed with absolute revulsion that while Schiff was accumulating immense wealth, pursuing manufactured plots, authentic, horrifying national security perils, such as foreign spying and international manipulation campaigns, were deliberately neglected because the committee was entirely consumed with nourishing the media apparatus. He informed Schiff that he accepted $6.46 million from individuals desiring to dominate human expression, and he supplied the exact commodity they bought. As if the monetary and moral transgressions were insufficient, Kennedy grabbed his fifth dossier. This binder held documentation of an unparalleled assault upon the democratic mechanism itself. Kennedy's tone became exceptionally somber as he guided the room back to the turbulent period of October 2020, presenting evidence of how an active congressman systematically tampered with a presidential contest by intentionally stifling accurate, authenticated data. Kennedy exhibited a chronology concerning the sensational journalistic report regarding a portable computer owned by a presidential contender's son, which harbored grave accusations of transnational graft. The narrative broke on the 14th of October 2020. Merely 4 hours subsequent, at 3:47 p.m., Schiff appeared on national broadcast television, self-assuredly pronouncing the entire narrative to be a complex Russian disinformation stratagem, providing absolutely zero substantiation to back this colossal assertion. 2.5 hours following that, at 6:23 p.m., Schiff's headquarters was actively organizing a public declaration endorsed by 51 former intelligence officials, positing that precise, unfounded claim. Kennedy showed the coordination emails on the monitors, validating that Schiff was the mastermind orchestrating the intelligence community's communal statement. However, Kennedy held a lethal trump card. He unveiled intensely classified FBI records that had been expressly declassified for this specific occasion. These internal agency files conclusively verified that at the precise instant Schiff coordinated the letter labeling the hardware a Russian fabrication, the FBI had already held the equipment in its custody for nearly a 12-month period. Crucially, the FBI had comprehensively validated the computer and its internal files as completely authentic. Schiff was not venturing an informed hypothesis. He was orchestrating a colossal public fraud campaign that flatly opposed verified federal intelligence. Kennedy detailed the machinery of this electoral meddling. Schiff did not just broadcast falsehoods on television. He leveraged the staggering might of his legislative position to bully private corporations into burying the truth. Subpoenaed records demonstrated Schiff's staff reaching out to major tech platforms within hours of the publication, demanding the material be eradicated. The tech behemoths, deeply reliant upon Schiff's regulatory goodwill, obeyed instantaneously, resulting in the suspension of prominent journalistic accounts. Content distribution algorithms were rigged to diminish the article's dissemination by 95%, and video conversations were globally expunged. The entirety of this was carried out because Schiff deceitfully convinced them it was foreign agitprop. Striding across the room, Kennedy imparted an expert seminar regarding the First Amendment. He clarified that the Constitution rigorously forbids the state from curtailing the liberties of speech or the press. Recognizing he lacked the lawful ability to enact censorship legislation, Schiff devised a despotic loophole. He exploited the implicit menace of federal oversight to compel his wealthy technological financiers to perform the censorship on his behalf. Kennedy brought forth post-election survey statistics that transmitted a tremor through the assembly. Numerous polls showed that between 4.6 and 9.4% of the electorate in crucial demographics affirmed they would have altered their ballots had they not been synthetically shielded from the reality of that hardware. Within a nationwide contest determined by a gap of just 44,000 ballots across 3 battleground states, the statistical inference was horrific. Kennedy locked eyes with Schiff and indicted him for potentially shifting the result of an American presidential election by weaponizing his mandate to blindfold the voting public. Kennedy's voice sliced through the oppressive quiet of the room as he noted that this profoundly disturbing conduct was not a singular event, but rather a deeply entrenched chronic disease. For 4 excruciating years, he contended, Representative Adam Schiff had fundamentally tainted the objective of the House Intelligence Committee. Instead of managing it as an inviolable buckler meant to shield the Republic from authentic exterior dangers, Schiff had weaponized the entity, altering it into a merciless, hyper-partisan censorship agency. This apparatus was exclusively committed to the digital extermination of any U.S. citizen whose sole identifiable offense was possessing the bravery to contest the dominant political dogmas generously bankrolled by his elite corporate patrons. Kennedy imparted a devastating philosophical axiom. When a chosen delegate actively and spitefully obstructs the American citizenry from retrieving the unfiltered, factual data necessary to formulate educated electoral choices, that delegate can no longer purport to be defending the democratic process. Conversely, they are actively dismantling the republic from its core. Ultimately, as the suffocating gravity of his prior charges enveloped the room, Kennedy transitioned with calculated lethargy to his concluding, most ruinous article of proof. Delving into his garment, he withdrew a diminutive, exceptionally battered edition of the United States Constitution. It was not an unblemished ceremonial artifact, but a severely abused pamphlet indicative of ceaseless, everyday handling. The delicate leaves were heavily marked, completely saturated with Kennedy's own meticulous script. These edges held a lifetime of juridical study, rigorously cross-linking decades of intricate Supreme Court rulings with the exact infractions of his sworn oath that he had just spent the previous hour outlining before the panel. Elevating the fragile text, he questioned Schiff his pitch, dropping to a menacing resonance if he continued to possess any recollection of the grave vow he had previously sworn. He prompted Schiff to recall the unbreakable pledge delivered before God and the nation to unconditionally uphold and protect that specific text against all adversaries, whether foreign or domestic. Kennedy purposefully paused, placing weight upon those 2 pivotal terms, support and defend. He embarked upon a masterful historical condemnation, observing that the prescient founding fathers had deliberately forged a national government with severely constrained, specifically listed authorities. They executed this specifically because they were utterly horrified by the historical certainty of individuals exactly resembling Adam Schiff. The creators of the nation comprehended that debased men would continuously endeavor to hoard unrestrained power. This intrinsic peril is the exact reason the Constitution was brilliantly constructed as an impenetrable enclosure for state authority. Nevertheless, Schiff had exhausted the whole of his political tenure, acting as an escape artist, perpetually hunting for gaps to smash those constitutional boundaries. Kennedy unfolded a folder and commenced reciting from a thoroughly documented registry outlining Schiff's legislative voting history. Schiff had militantly backed 47 distinct parliamentary proposals expressly crafted to drastically enlarge unconstitutional state espionage. He had zealously advocated for 23 separate initiatives carefully engineered to curtail and demolish the free expression safeguards assured by the First Amendment. Moreover, he had publicly championed 15 convoluted plots directed at completely bypassing the essential privacy shields consecrated within the Fourth Amendment. In this climactic instant, Kennedy's carefully manicured, disarming rural advocate facade thoroughly dissipated. Substituting, it was the imposing genius of a magna cum laude Harvard Law alumnus and a former judicial clerk for the Supreme Tribunal in the nation. The rustic charisma was supplanted by the operative exactness of a premier prosecutor administering the unavoidable strike. He presented the ultimate, crushing charge. He cataloged the crimes with a rhythmic, punishing cadence, leaking extraordinarily delicate, restricted operations purely for fleeting personal media advantage, intentionally advancing fabricated overseas disinformation crusades with the explicit intent of ruining a political adversary, methodically collaborating with unbridled private technological monopolies to muzzle working-class Americans, and, finally, meddling in a sovereign national election via calculated, intentional fraud. Kennedy scanned the hushed chamber a final time prior to issuing his ultimate verdict. This, he pronounced with absolute, unwavering conviction, was not legislative supervision, nor was it remotely an act of virtuous public duty. It was, without reservation or exemption, the verbatim dictionary description of despotism. Extracting a copy of his own signed oath of office, Kennedy's vocal delivery turned piercing and definitive. He affirmed that when he pledged to shield the Constitution from internal foes, he intended every individual word, and that presently he was vigorously executing that hallowed commitment. He labeled Schiff as an internal adversary to the foundational text he had sworn to safeguard. Quoting the 10th Amendment, Kennedy cautioned the room that governmental authority appertains exclusively to the populace and the states, not to haughty lawmakers who fleetingly inhabit lavish chambers. He charged Schiff with distorting the citizens' loaned authority to assault the citizens' inherent liberties. The muteness in the hall was absolute as Kennedy positioned himself to land the ultimate devastating strike. He observed that the central catastrophe of the day was not merely that Schiff was profoundly, incurably tainted. The genuine tragedy was that the residents of California had bestowed upon him the weighty, exceptional honor of championing their voices within the corridors of Congress, and Schiff had egocentrically wasted that magnificent privilege on personal, fiscal enrichment, and tawdry political drama. Kennedy reached inside his coat and retrieved a bundle of handwritten correspondence. They were from Schiff's own constituents. He recited the thoughts of Sarah from Glendale, who penned that she cast her ballot for Schiff to combat corruption, only to witness him morph into the corruption itself. He read from Michael in Burbank, whose First Amendment rights were sold out to Hollywood donors. He recited from Maria in Pasadena, who conveyed profound, agonizing shame that Adam Schiff served as the representative of her community. Kennedy deposited the correspondence delicately onto the desk, handling the expressions of the betrayed voters with profound respect. He gazed at the shattered figure seated opposite him and defined the core divergence between them. Kennedy proclaimed that he journeyed to Washington for a dual purpose: to aid the citizens of Louisiana and to aggressively champion the Constitution. Schiff, conversely, traveled to Washington to forge a profitable individual brand, to amass immense fortunes, and to achieve celebrity. Whenever the obligations of civic duty clashed with his unquenchable personal greed, Schiff opted for himself every solitary time, stepping deliberately away from the metallic stalk of the microphone, allowing the sudden physical distance to emphasize the ultimate finality of his words. Kennedy delivered his final judgment, a devastatingly simple phrase that would instantly become legendary in the annals of American political history. He allowed his booming prosecutorial voice to drop to a quiet, piercing register, noting softly that back home in the deep, winding bayous of Louisiana, they have an old, enduring saying that perfectly encapsulated the undeniable gravity of the moment. Locking his steely gaze onto his opponent, he let the sheer weight of his impending words settle into the tense air before stating that you can take a man and put a fancy, highly sought-after Harvard degree on a deeply corrupt politician, but at the absolute end of the long, revealing day, he is still just a deeply corrupt politician. Kennedy slowly, with immense, almost religious reverence, hoisted his battered, heavily annotated edition of the United States Constitution high in the air for every camera and spectator to witness, declaring that the brilliant, foundational document was still vividly alive and functionally well, but that Adam Schiff's lucrative career pretending to defend it had permanently, irrevocably ended the very moment he chose to maliciously attack it. What immediately followed this monumental pronouncement was exactly 30 seconds of the most profound, agonizing, and heavy silence ever recorded in modern political history. It was a thick, suffocating quietude that descended upon the room like a physical weight. Everyone in the grand, historic chamber, from the highest-ranking elected officials down to the junior staffers, clutching their notepads, understood with crystal clarity that they had just witnessed an absolute, undeniable paradigm shift in the fabric of Washington power dynamics. A polished, seemingly untouchable career politician had been completely, thoroughly, intellectually, and morally dismantled by a man who actually understood the true foundational weight of genuine public service. Across the polished mahogany table, Adam Schiff sat entirely frozen, his eyes staring blankly and uncomprehendingly at his own trembling hands, entirely incapable of formulating a single, coherent sentence of defense against the insurmountable mountain of authenticated, fully documented truth that had just buried him. Beside him, the frantic whispering of his phalanx of expensive, highly credentialed lawyers abruptly stopped. There was simply no legal strategy, no clever rhetorical maneuvering, and no procedural loophole that could possibly undo or obscure the stark, terrifying reality of what had just been mercilessly laid bare before the nation. Suddenly, violently, the fragile, glass-like silence was shattered as the grand chamber erupted into a massive, deafening, and spontaneous standing ovation that lasted for nearly 5 unbroken, thunderous minutes. The sheer volume of the applause shook the very foundations of the room, echoing down the marble corridors of the Capitol. Crucially, it was not a predictable, partisan display of tribal loyalty. Rather, visibly moved staff members, neutral gallery observers, and even several conflicted Democratic colleagues who could no longer in good conscience defend the sheer, documented scale of the exposed corruption, stood to their feet and applauded. They were not merely cheering for a political victory. They were applauding the incredibly rare, beautiful, and desperately needed sight of unchecked, arrogant power finally being held strictly and unapologetically accountable to the fundamental, non-negotiable constitutional principles that built the Republic. Almost simultaneously, the shockwaves radiating outside the walls of the building were immediate, unprecedented, and utterly devastating to the established media narrative. Within a matter of mere minutes, the complex social media algorithms of every major tech platform were completely overwhelmed, crashing under the sheer volume of organic user traffic, sharing the clips of the confrontation. The documentation Kennedy had methodically presented was so flawless, so heavily reliant on Schiff's own subpoenaed records, official FBI memos, and irrefutable bank statements, that the traditional, well-oiled media spin machines broke down entirely, unable to construct a viable counter-narrative. Even the most reliably loyal liberal cable news anchors appeared visibly shaken and pale on live television, entirely unable to casually dismiss the catastrophic event as standard, easily forgotten partisan bickering. Across the globe, the most widely shared image rocketing across the internet was not a triumphant picture of Kennedy shouting, but rather the silent, pathetic, frozen image of Adam Schiff, a man who had successfully built an entire political empire on manipulating words, sitting completely speechless and politically naked in the harsh, unforgiving face of absolute truth. Within the ensuing 48 hours, the severe political consequences of the hearing materialized with a brutal, dizzying speed that left Washington insiders reeling. Bowing to the immense, crushing pressure of public outrage, House leadership quietly and swiftly announced that Schiff would be stepping back from all of his vital, highly sensitive intelligence assignments pending a comprehensive, independent review of his conduct. Almost simultaneously, the massive, previously reliable fundraising pipeline from the wealthy entertainment industry evaporated overnight as terrified, image-conscious donors frantically scrambled to legally distance themselves from a man whose blatant financial corruption and systemic influence peddling had just been broadcast to the entire world. The friendly late-night television hosts, who had spent years carefully portraying him as a valiant, untouchable hero of the resistance, quietly scrubbed his planned appearances from their upcoming broadcast schedules, treating him like a sudden pariah. Most consequentially, high-ranking officials within the Department of Justice began quietly and officially requesting the unredacted transcripts and the full cache of documentation from Kennedy's masterful presentation to evaluate the undeniable evidence of perjury and the catastrophic mishandling of classified intelligence for potential and highly anticipated criminal referrals. Through this singular, masterful, and historically unprecedented execution of legislative duty, Senator John Kennedy, the very man whom the sophisticated Washington elite had relentlessly, unceasingly mocked and dismissed as nothing more than a simple, uncultured country lawyer, had accomplished the absolute, undeniable impossible. For years, the political establishment had looked down upon his deliberate Southern drawl and his battered briefcase, fundamentally misjudging the immense legal powerhouse that lay just beneath his folksy exterior. Yet, when the moment of profound constitutional reckoning finally arrived, it was this exact underestimated man who stepped forward to completely dismantle a heavily fortified empire of political deception. He did not resort to the modern legislative tactics of theatrical screaming matches, fabricated partisan outrage, or easily digestible cable news soundbites. Instead, relying upon a quiet, relentless methodology, he achieved this monumental victory using absolutely nothing but infinite measured patience, a towering, surgical intellect refined at the highest levels of legal academia, and the crushing, unvarnished weight of documented truth. By meticulously laying out subpoenaed records, bank statements, and verified internal communications, he systematically stripped away the protective layers of media spin. In doing so, he had successfully and permanently reminded the entirety of the cynical, deeply entrenched American political establishment that the United States Constitution is definitively not a dead, forgotten relic of the past. It is not a dusty, archaic parchment meant merely for ceremonial display, while its core tenets are routinely ignored by the powerful. Rather, he forcefully proved to a captive, stunned congressional audience that the Constitution is a fiercely living, breathing mechanism of justice. It is a brilliantly engineered, enduring framework designed specifically to trap and neutralize the tyrannical impulses of corruptible men. Kennedy illustrated with devastating precision that this constitutional machinery still operates and works flawlessly when it is deliberately wielded by an individual who possesses both the unwavering moral courage and the profound scholarly constitutional knowledge required to properly defend it against those who actively seek to circumvent its boundaries. In the condensed span of a single, world-altering afternoon, Senator Kennedy shattered the prevailing, pessimistic national illusion that the elite political class is permanently shielded from consequence. He proved definitively to the intently watching nation that absolute, uncompromising accountability is still entirely possible within the halls of the federal government. He delivered a resounding, inescapable message that reverberated through the very bedrock of the Republic, reaffirming the most sacred promise of the American experiment. He established, beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt, that in the United States of America, absolutely no one, regardless of the staggering immensity of their personal wealth, the sprawling, intricate web of their elite political connections, or the relentless, ubiquitous nature of their celebrated television appearances, is truly above the blinding, purifying light of the law. The carefully constructed illusion of untouchability, built over years of cozy media relationships and closed-door corporate deals, was entirely evaporated by a public servant who simply chose to read the documents and demand strict adherence to the sworn oath of office. In this ultimate triumph, truth emerged not just as an abstract philosophical concept, but as an unstoppable, leveling force that fundamentally restored the balance of democratic power.